Without further ado, though, it is our hour, and we have someone else coming up an hour later. So I'm going to invite Gail Gail, you are unmuted. Perfect. And Gail will take the spotlight and introduce Sandy.
Welcome everyone to Messy Creativity Learning Styles session. My name is Gail Purcell and I'm a member of the Messy Church team at Transcona Memorial United Church in Winnipeg, where my primary role has been to coordinate volunteers for our monthly Messy Church gatherings. I'm also a member of the Messy Church Canadian Conference Planning team. Today, I am very excited to introduce you to Sandy Brodine. Sandy is a minister in the Uniting Church in Australia with a passion for finding creative new ways to help people follow Jesus and engage with their faith. Sandy ministers with a number of new faith communities in the Banyule network of Uniting Churches, a Messy Church, an intergenerational interactive Sunday community called Common Ground, and Space, a contemplative community. Prior to ministry, Sandy was a teacher of Chinese, English, and religious education in secondary school. Sandy is married to Brendan, and they have a daughter, Sophia. In addition to all of this, Sandy is incredibly creative and manages to find time for fiber arts, painting icons, genealogy, cooking, and travel. Welcome, Sandy. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, or good evening for you, and good morning for me. It's lovely that you were able to have this at a time when I could join you awake rather than in the middle of the night. So I'm very grateful to be there. I hope to actually manage to get to Canada in real life one of these days. That would be just delightful. So as Gail said, I'm a minister of the word in the Uniting Church, which formed in 1977 from the Methodists, the Presbyterians, and the Congregationalists. So it's a little bit different to the United Church in Canada, I think, in terms of its original makeup. But that's who we are. As Gail said, have a number of different communities that I oversee, as well as being part of a network of churches that has 5 traditional Sunday morning congregations as well. So it's a big enterprise and a ministry team of 3. So I've particularly enjoyed the creative aspect of developing ways for people in all sorts of styles of worship to be able to make meaning of the biblical text and to be able to kind of crawl inside it and see what it has to say to them as they explore what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. So as Carol's already spruiked the book, can I just have the next slide, Graham? This is the Messy Discipleship book. It's a really good book. So there's 5 chapters on each of the 5 Messy Church values by people from around the globe. So 2 Australians, a New Zealander, and I think 2 people from the UK, which isn't quite around the globe, but it's certainly international. So we've had fun putting that together, and it's just delightful to read. There's also some great stuff about the research in the UK into the longevity of discipleship and how disciples have grown in Messy Church, which is incredibly useful to read. Thanks, Graham. So the next, if I put that on view, am I going to see that? Let's just do this. That's better. All right. The Messy Church values, I hope, are well known to you. I hope you recognise them. This hasn't ended up with the cross in the centre, but the central value off which everything else hangs is obviously the Christ-centred value, the idea that Christ is the centre of everything. And then from around those, we have all age, hospitality, celebration, and creativity. So all of these 5 things come together to make Messy Church what it is. And I suggest they're actually important for worship and for religious communities of all kinds. One of my favorite little moments in the Messy Discipleship book is Martin Payne's fantastic chapter on hospitality, where he talks about the hospitality of Messy Church not just being the meal, but being about all three movements of Messy Church. So he talks about Messy Church being table church. So there's the sharing around the craft tables or the activities tables, the sharing of communion or of worship together in the celebration time, and the sharing of hospitality around the tables at the meal. So thinking about how all of those three things provide hospitality and welcome. And I find that really helpful. And I think that creativity is another way that we provide hospitality and provide welcome and inclusion for all sorts of people in our messy family, in our messy church. So Graham, the next one. Now, I hear you've already heard about storytelling today, and I want to go into now some of the whys about creativity, why you might think creativity is important. It's not just because a bit of glitter and a bit of sparkle encourages kids to want to come. It's not sort of the equivalent of the 1970s. If we just play guitar instead of the organ, people will think church is great and they'll all turn up. There is a really, really good reason why creativity matters in worship. And that why is that we follow a great storyteller. Storytelling was the educational model or the learning style of choice for Jesus of Nazareth. So he didn't just give them dry, dusty worksheets where they had to fill in the answers or scratch them into the desert sands with a stick. Instead, he took them out on the road and walked with them. He showed them what to do. He gave them examples, and he told them strange stories, perplexing stories that they had to kind of wrestle with and work out what they meant and what they were all about. Now, you might wonder how successful that strategy was. And certainly if you take a bit of a look at the disciples, they didn't get it right all the time, did they? If you think about how often the disciples muck it up or say the wrong thing, it happens quite a lot. But in that failing and regular failing over and over again at playing, in a way, playing at being disciples, they learned. They had experiences, they mucked it up, they learned about how better to follow Jesus. And over time, by the time Jesus left, this strange and motley band of tax collectors and former fishermen were ready to follow Jesus and to share the faith with other people. So all of Jesus's approach to teaching is an approach that involves creativity, telling stories, play, exploring, wondering, making mistakes and trying again. And these are really important in Messy Church too. Thanks, Graham. And you can see how important this was in the early church in the way that the early church paint and draw in the catacombs. So these are some Roman catacombs paintings, perhaps some of the very, very earliest Christian art. So on the left of the screen, you've got the Good Shepherd, perhaps one of the very, very earliest drawings of Jesus in existence. You've got a picture there of the Last Supper with Jesus at the centre sharing the meal, and the woman touching Jesus's cloak on the far right. So ways of exploring the story and trying to make meaning and sense of what the story is all about. Thanks, Graham. And of course, this continues throughout Christian history, and we use all sorts of clever ways of doing this. Artists and architects and playwrights and dramatists and musicians have all found ways to explore the story of Jesus and to encourage wondering. When you walk into a cathedral and you see those extraordinary stained glass windows, it's not just for people who can't read, it's for anybody who wants to wonder about the story and think, what is going on there? And what is God asking me to do? Or how does this change my life when I explore this story, that's the purpose of all of those extraordinary works of art that we have around us in the Christian tradition all over the world. Thanks, Graham. And just in case you thought it was kind of not deeply enmeshed in theological study in academia, this is Rowan Williams, one of the great theologians and biblical scholars of our time, the former Archbishop of Canterbury. He says, "My aim in reading is not to find instructions, but to open myself up to God's world, to the landscape of God's action and the rhythms of life lived in God's presence." So he's suggesting that being open to the scriptures brings all of our creative powers with us to when we come to the text, all of our wondering, all of our artistic, creative abilities come into play when we want to really explore what the text is about and how it might make meaning for our lives. Thank you. And Nicholas Lash, who's another great he's a theologian. Nicholas died last year, I think, and was one of my teachers. He was the mentor of one of my teachers, so that's how I came across his writing. He says the New Testament texts do not simply give symbolic narrative expression to certain fundamental and persuasive features of the human drama. They also express their author's confidence in the one man in whom the mystery of divine action is seen to have been embodied and disclosed. So the stories give us a performative experience of meeting Jesus in the text and working out how to engage with him. So in creatively stepping inside the text and inhabiting us, the text can critique us and invite us to change and to grow as Christians. Thanks. So moving now from the why into the how. Again, one of the perhaps critiques we have of things like messy church or creative worship is that it's a dumbing down. It's a simplification of the gospel. And I hope that having heard from Rowan Williams and Nicholas Lash, that you might see that, in fact, I don't think it's a dumbing down at all. In fact, I think it involves a really deep and thoughtful way of exploring the text. So if you think about, for example, playing jazz music, to be a really good jazz musician, you need to know your chords and your arpeggios and your scales and all sorts of other things to be really, really good at it. My nephew has just finished his undergraduate music degree, and the extraordinary amount of time and effort it took for him to become a jazz musician is quite amazing. Doesn't just happen, creativity. It involves some serious work. And of course, if you look there at that lovely photo of Alan Rickman and Helen Mirren in a Shakespearean production, it takes extraordinary talent and hard work to be able to perform something like that. So creativity and creative worship involves a deep understanding of the biblical text and a deep engagement with it. Thanks. So how do we do this? So I'm going to share a couple of different methods with you, a couple of different tools that you might have in your toolkit that you might carry with you when you're thinking about your messy church activities that might help you to tinker with what you're doing as you prepare for messy church. I hope that a lot of you have experienced godly play. And if you have noticed how extraordinary the wondering questions are. So godly play comes from the Montessori school, which is a way of teaching early learning students that was Montessori lived in the 1920s, and Montessori affected the way primary teaching was taught, and the development of things like sensory play and wondering and inquiry-based approaches to learning all come out of that. So Jerome Berryman, when he set up the idea of godly play, put all of these things into how he wrote those stories and put them together. So if you've not had the experience of godly play and the experience of how the wondering questions set children free and adults free to ask the questions about the text, I encourage you to learn about godly play. Thanks, Graham. Another really useful tool is Bloom's taxonomy. So this is a teaching tool. If you go and do a teaching degree, you'll learn about Bloom's taxonomy. And what the reason I like it is it sort of sets up some different levels of the kinds of information or the kinds of learning you get from a particular activity. So sort of the bottom, if you see that purple one right down the bottom, remembering, is the kind of activity or kind of thing where, you know, you want the answer to be Jesus. So, you know, what was he wearing? A red top. What did Jesus ride into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday? A donkey. That's the kind of level of information that's happening at the bottom. The second level might be some sort of interpreting or summary where you have to kind of summarize the story or show that you've understood something. There might be some paraphrasing or some discussing of whatever the text is or the story. The next one, further up the higher order chain, is applying the knowledge. So how do I make that knowledge real in my context? And I might calculate something, or I might use a diagram, or I might think about what that means in my life. That would be applying. And then there's the most higher order of these different things: creating, evaluating, and analysing. So they are the three highest of order activities: designing, building, shaping, producing something with the text, evaluating it, critically thinking about it. What does it mean? Judging it, defending it, criticizing it. And the last one is analysing. So when you're thinking about putting together activities for Messy Church, try and lift the bar on what you're asking people to do with the text. Try and encourage them to do some of those higher order thinking. So I'm going to give you an example of some of our craziness here. This is one of the things we've done, and try and maybe hopefully explain a little bit of how we've used Bloom's taxonomy in this. So Graham, if you go on to the next slide. Now, we've been in Victoria, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. We are the longest lockdown city in the world. Now, I'm, not super excited about that fact, but we're over 300 days now in a very tight lockdown. So our kids have been off school for about half of last year and about half of this year, and they're all missing each other. And most of our Messy Church has been on Zoom. We got off Zoom from about November last year till about May this year, and we've been back on since. So last year, early on, I had a play date on Zoom with one of the mums. And about halfway through, we couldn't get a word in edgeways because the kids were playing Minecraft together. And so Mandy, the mum, said to me, "Oh, you know what we could do? We could have a Messy Church play date on Minecraft and all the kids could play together." So we had to go at that, and it was a complete schmozzle. But what it did was encourage us to think about, well, the kids really enjoyed this. What could we do? And then as a few of the adults started to talk, we discovered that a few people had skills in Minecraft, the adults did. A couple of the kids were really keen to build stories together. And we started to think about how we could use this together as a tool. So if you go on to the next slide, Graham. So what ended up happening, and it's had a couple of iterations and changes as we've gone along, but in the start, we had the kids building a story, a small group of kids building the story. I put together a godly play script, really, with scenes. So, for example, you're about to see Jonah and the whale. Jonah's Ark is what the kids keep calling it. So if I say Jonah's Ark, just, I do know Jonah is with the whale, not the ark, but the kids call it that. So there's the ship, which is why they call it that, scene, the whale scene, the back in Nineveh scene, and the tree dying scene. So there's 4 different scenes in the story. In the new version, the way we've done it this year, we've put the kids in 4 groups, and they've had 45 minutes to build the story. And they do it with there's adults involved as well. Some of our adults enjoy it too. And so they get in these groups and they build the story. I'll show you in a moment. They really have to use higher order thinking in order to be able to do this. They've got to actually think about what's going on in the story. They've got to create it and build it. They've got to apply. They end up thinking about, what does this mean for me? Once they've built the inside of the whale, they ask really interesting questions about, what does it mean? How would it feel to be stuck inside that whale? What would it smell like? You get fantastic creative thinking going on. And yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about that one. Is everyone, I hope you've understood that. They build the story, they create the story, and they think about it deeply. Thanks, Graham. I think I had a couple of other points I wanted to make. Yes, that's right. And then after that, and I'll show you an example of this in tomorrow's session, they pray together using a style appropriate to the story. So I won't tell you any more about that because I'll share that tomorrow. And then we evaluate what we've done. We talk about what we enjoyed the most. What would we critique about the story? Do we have all the story we need? A number of those godly play questions. We critique the story and experience it together. So Graham, I'm going to ask you to show the first clip. The first clip is a little video of about a minute that shows you what it looks like to be in Minecraft, so you can see what it looks like as the kids build the story. Just a quick whiz around, and then after that, if you could go straight, Graham, into the short version of what the Jonah and the whale story looked like. So that gives you an idea of what it's like inside, and here's the story.
Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah. Arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and tell them that they are bad and need to change and become good. Now prophets are people who come close to God, and God comes close to them, so that they know what God is telling them to do. Then they go and do it.
Jonah turned and went the other way. He found a ship going to Tarshish in Spain. It was as far from Nineveh as you could go. Suddenly a great storm broke out. The sailors were afraid, so each one prayed to his own god. They threw everything they were carrying into the ocean to make the ship light so it would float. Now, a prophet is someone who helps people to discover what it is best to do. They went looking for Jonah. Do you know where he was? He was sleeping in the bottom of the boat. The captain found him and commanded him to call on his God and save them. Now the people were more afraid. They decided to cast lots to see whom God was angry at. They wanted to throw that person overboard to get rid of him. Now a prophet is someone who can speak for the one true God, but Jonah still did not speak. The sailors asked him who he was. They told him he worshipped God, one who made sea and the dry land. Then sailors were afraid. They knew that he was trying to flee from God. The sea grew more troubled, so Jonah said, "Throw me in and the storm will stop."
So they threw him in. All was suddenly quiet. The sea was calm. Now a prophet, someone who brings people close to God by what he or she says and does. Jonah said nothing, but when the sea grew calm, the sailors all fell down and worshipped the true God. Now a prophet is someone who is close to God, and false prophet is very far from God. When Jonah was thrown into the water, he was neither close nor far from God. He was sinking. As he sank, a great fish swam up and swallowed him. Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah began to pray, "Dear God, I am sorry. I ask for forgiveness." And the fish began to feel very strange. It grew sicker and sicker. Finally, it swam to shore and vomited out Jonah onto the dry land.
Now, profound apologies. I've shortened that. I didn't. You're not going to see the last two because it'll take too long. But if you want to see the full version with Nineveh and the tree that dies, the tree withers and goes from. You can see it in the background there. It's green and it goes grey and black as he curses the tree. If you want to have a look at that, you can find it on Vimeo. I'll send you a link. Next one, please, Graham. So another really good tool to have, apart from Bloom's taxonomy, is Gardner's multiple intelligences. And Gardner talks about the fact that we all learn in different ways and all have different preferred styles for information to really seep into our being and our person. So learning isn't just about hearing somebody say something and having it go into your ears. It's better done with doing in lots of different ways. So you've got there music as a way of learning, activity, physical doing, people who are interpersonal and learn from being in relation with others and talking things out. Some people who are good at logic and science or maths. People who are really into nature, and Messy Church is certainly taking a real foray into looking at nature as a way of learning at the moment. People who are introverts and who look inside themselves and learn from their own journaling or thinking about the way the world is. People who learn visually is the last one. So people who learn from images or those sorts of things. There's all these different ways of learning. So next one, Graham, just quickly, and then we'll move straight on. So this worked example I'm going to give you is to talk about logical and mathematical and the nature way of those two ways of learning. So they're ones that we've particularly picked up in our Messy Church. There's not time to show you all 8, so I just thought I'd show you one that we've really picked up on. Thanks, Graham. So we don't often think of science as being creative, too. You think of science as being about truth and facts, and scientists know things and they give us the facts about how we do things. But in fact, science method is deeply, deeply creative. Albert Einstein says, "I am enough of an artist to draw freely upon my imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world." And if you want a really good example of somebody whose creative scientific thinking brought out one of the greatest kind of discoveries of the 20th century, or developments in scientific knowledge in the 20th century, then Albert Einstein is a perfect example of that. Thanks, Graham. So a little closer to home for me, we're really lucky where we are situated. We're right next to La Trobe University. And so, in fact, a couple of the professors from La Trobe University are members of our network, part of our churches. Very convenient. And so when we were thinking about what we would do with science in Messy Church, we got together. Mike Clark is a zoologist and leads the zoology department. And he is really passionate about working with young people and really passionate about how science is a way to help people to think creatively. So this is him speaking. He says, "As a scientist, you are constantly searching for creative new ways to view a problem in the hope that it might lead to new insights into how the world really works." He goes on to say a number of things about why science is important. It helps kids to understand that the extraordinary universe that God created is wonderful and complex and knowable. That great creativity is needed by scientists to understand the extraordinary universe that God has created. He is also passionate about helping people understand that you can be a scientist and at the same time be a Christian, and that the two ways of understanding the world can actually speak to each other and be really, really helpful to each other. And that's one of the things that a number of the scientists in our community really work on quite well together. He says that science answers the how questions and faith addresses the why questions, and both are really, really important. The how questions and the why questions about the world. Thanks, Graham. So this is some of our kids at a couple of different versions of science activities. We try and have, this is a meaning-making way of doing things a lot of the time. In the middle shot there, you can see Mike on the right of the screen explaining something about, I think that was about what insects leave on the back of leaves so that birds can eat them or something. That's his area of expertise. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the girls playing with making slime, which is always a good idea. And you can talk about polymers and how things can change from one form to another, and maybe something about how God can change us. And on the left, Sophia, my daughter, a bit older than in the middle picture, is teaching a group of kids about surface tension and water, I think, or it might have been about vision and light in an experiment. But you can see how the kids are all engaged in what's going on there and part of what's happening. I think we might, I'm not sure if we've got time. There's one other little thing I wanted to say, but this is a 2-minute clip. We probably do have time. So this is an experiment that we actually had used this video in Messy Church and shared it with the kids and then discussed it. This is an experiment that they did at Melbourne University. I won't give you any more information, but I'll get Graham to show it. It's very, very good fun.
This display asks the question, what's in our waste and what we currently do with it and what we might do into the future. In our urine, which is one of our wastes, there's lots of carbon, there's lots of nitrogen, and there's actually lots of water. So Urinatron's a science gallery pop-up at the University of Melbourne. We've got a whole series of microbial fuel cells where we take urine from the public and we use those fuel cells to generate some electricity and break down the carbon in the urine. And from there, we take the spent urine and we put it through a series of columns and membranes and produce clean water. Would you drink it? Oh, great. So have a look. It's nice and clean, isn't it? No, there's no floaty bits. It's very, very pure water.
I reckon it's pretty cool. It's interesting how we can use our piss quite literally to power stuff.
Yeah, I knew like you could get water out of urine, but not like the carbon and the nitrogen and everything else. So that was the surprising bit.
We need to be more sustainable with what we do. So I think it's a cool idea.
This is a collaboration between an artist in France and myself. And at one level, it's supposed to draw people in where they see it and they say, oh, I wonder what that is. And then it's to start a conversation about the fact that we dispose of a lot of our nutrients in our water every day and we don't reuse them.
In Urinatron, we really want people to reimagine your waste. We want to ask difficult questions and get people to reassess things that we literally flush away or don't even think about as a valuable resource. So since I donated to Urinatron, every single time I go to the toilet, I feel a little bit of shame that I'm flushing energy away.
The Vice-Chancellor of the university has donated into the display, along with probably around about 500 others. So we've had a great reaction from literally the top to the bottom of the university in terms of the donations into the system.
It's really starting conversations where at the beginning of the conversation, people are like, this is disgusting. I do not want to do it. And by the end of it, they're going, yeah, this is something that we should think about. So that changing, flipping a switch of something that was taboo to no longer being taboo is an absolute joy to behold.
I think it is the future of waste and resourcefulness in the sense that we cannot continue to use a lot of energy to produce fertilizers when we throw a lot of fertilizer away every day. We can't continue to throw away good water every day. We need to break the pollution cycle in that system, and we need to use a lot less energy in dealing with our waste. So that's Urinatron.
So that's not one you can actually do at Messy Church, but it gives you an idea of how you can share the questions, and even watching that little clip with the kids was enough, even though they couldn't do it themselves. It really had some fantastic discussion that it created. So next slide quickly. There's some fantastic resources available for doing science. There's a list of them I've got if you're interested, but this is the Messy Church Does Science book that's available both as PDF and as a hard copy. And it's got lots of great worked examples of very simple things you can do at Messy Church. And you can find lots of them on Pinterest. I've got a board and BRF's got a board. Looking at different experiments, and you can think very clearly yourself using something like Bloom's taxonomy or Gardner's multiple intelligences. How might I use this to kind of shine a light on this biblical story and help kids to understand the story better? It's a really good way of doing it. And just a final example about why I think science is a really good example, just on the last slide. This is my daughter Sophia at Messy Church, and it takes me back to that question or that point of Mike Clark's about being a scientist. You can be a scientist and at the same time be a Christian. So I'm going to read you this couple of paragraphs from my chapter in the Messy Church book, talking about my little Sophia. So Sophia says, so this is me writing. I have seen this approach about Messy Church in science and creativity at work in the life of my own daughter, who has a deeply inquiring mind. About 18 months ago, prior to one of our Messy Science sessions, my daughter, then aged 7.5, informed me that she could no longer believe in God because of the Big Bang. If the scientific explanation she had been taught at school was true, then God could not be, she reasoned. We had discussed this, and I helped her to think about some different kinds of questions that science and faith wrestled with. I encouraged her to ask questions and to talk to people she respected at church and school about it. Just recently, a year and a half later, after hearing stories at Messy Church and engaging with people she trusts, she informs me that she now does believe in God and explained how she had come to this conclusion. Who knows what other hurdles she will face in her faith development, but certainly this creative thinking approach has helped her to come to an answer which is satisfying to her now 9-year-old mind. So being able to explore creatively, to ask questions, to engage with people of all ages about the big questions of faith has at this stage helped my daughter. And for that, I am profoundly grateful to God. That's all I had to share. I'm really looking forward to hearing your comments and questions.